The fourth Democratic debate will be held on October 15, 2019 in Westerville, Ohio, moderated by CNN's Erin Burnett and Anderson Cooper, as well as New York Times national editor Marc Lacey. The debate will feature 12 of the top polling candidates: Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Andrew Yang, Beto O'Rourke, Cory Booker, Tulsi Gabbard, Amy Klobuchar, Julian Castro, and Tom Steyer. Actually, Tulsi Gabbard just recently put out a statement saying she is considering boycotting this debate, in part because the debates are too much like reality TV. Kind of a strange complaint from one of the biggest drama-making candidates. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to assume she's in. It won't really make too much of a difference overall. In this video, I'm going to give you my predictions of what to expect of each of these candidates based on their past performances, apparent strategies, and what's been going on in the news. Hopefully this will give you some sense of an answer to this question: what's going to happen? Before we kick things off, I gotta give a shout out to all my amazing patrons: Sergio Guerrero, Emil Stierbeck-Moller, Nail Tariq, Charlotte Holden, C-Mac, David Goodrich, Victor Holmberg, Ryan Judge, Adam Riordan, Torch Camaro, Stroden, Dawson Finger, Louise, Maxwell Verkuyen, Eduardo Gonzalez, Christopher Green, Nordir, Matthew Garish, Denkuro, Sir Bobbit, Jack Stokes, Question Time Fanac 2020, Clayton Gibson, Deckerlink, Ahigao Comics, Sarah Parker Schmilt, Blake Mallon, Carlos, and Mike Lodato. You can join this list of amazing, generous people by heading over to patreon.com/questiontime. Alright, let's get into the candidates, beginning with Tom Steyer. This will be Tom Steyer's first debate, and he'll probably be the most unfamiliar face on stage for most Americans. For those of you unfamiliar, Steyer is a billionaire former hedge fund manager, philanthropist, and consistent Democratic mega donor, once described by Open Secrets as the top all-time Democratic donor. Steyer has pledged to spend $100 million on his own presidential campaign and spent over $7 million on ads in just his first month. Not surprisingly, Steyer's policies match with those of the politicians who tend to be funded by the Democratic mega donors. He supports a public option and not Medicare for all. His foreign policy positions are focused on rebuilding America's reputation in the wake of the Trump era, rather than addressing imperialism or regime change. Despite being a mega donor, Steyer has a whole plan for fixing American democracy, which he calls structural reform. But once again, much of his prescriptions are moderate: instituting 12-year congressional term limits, introducing voting at home, and establishing independent redistricting commissions. All plans that I believe would be positive steps, but aren't exactly radical. He also proposes repealing Citizens United and introducing public financing of elections. Both of these moves would be huge, but he doesn't appear to have a plan on how to actually accomplish these things. Does he want to overturn Citizens United by making that issue a litmus test for Supreme Court appointments, or will he encourage a constitutional convention? He doesn't say, which honestly makes me doubt his sincerity. As for public financing of campaigns, some candidates have detailed plans to accomplish this, like Andrew Yang's democracy dollars. For Steyer, the idea is expressed in just half of a sentence on his website. Again, that kind of makes me doubt his sincerity. In general, what I would expect from a President Steyer would be mild, moderate liberal reforms around the edges, but the chances of him getting there are extremely low. Despite his almost limitless campaign resources and massive spending so far, Steyer is tied with Tulsi Gabbard as the lowest polling candidate to make the debate. Their RCP averages of 0.6% are also shared with Bullock and Williamson, who did not make it on stage. As a massive political donor, Steyer may be the exact opposite of what the grassroots want, given that America seems to be experiencing a populist wave. In order to turn himself into a real contender for the nomination, Steyer will have to have an astounding performance in the debate, but that's not likely to happen. Steyer may be deeply involved in politics, but he's not a politician. When it comes to debates, he is an amateur, stepping up to bat against some pretty impressive orators. With a less than original political message and little experience speaking in a forum like this, he's not exactly likely to thrive. If you have low expectations of Steyer, lower them again, and you'll still probably be disappointed with his performance in the fourth Democratic debate. After narrowly failing to make the cut for the September debate, Tulsi Gabbard will be returning to the presidential debate stage this time around. Despite polling relatively low, Gabbard has been the most Googled candidate every time she's made it to the stage, and has made her mark with aggressive attacks against her fellow candidates. Perhaps most notably, her sharp critique of Kamala Harris's record as the AG of California. This time around, Gabbard would be likely to go after another serious candidate, but it's hard to see who she would target. Both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are part of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and thus natural allies for Tulsi. Warren could be criticized for softening her language in support of Medicare for all, but Tulsi has done the same. So of the top three, that leaves just Joe Biden. But Gabbard has thus far avoided going after him. She's actually defended Joe Biden when he was facing heat over busing. She's even defended him in regards to a top issue for her campaign: regime change. Regarding his vote on Iraq, Tulsi told The Hill he was wrong. He said he was wrong and he apologized for it more than once. That's the kind of reflection that I think is important for any one of our politicians who made that wrong and fateful decision to vote for the Iraq War. My sense of things is that Gabbard at this point understands that her chances of securing the nomination are very long, and is probably angling for a position in a potential Democratic White House, which means avoiding conflicts with the most likely candidates. Since a lot of the headway she's made in the past have been based on strong attacks on other candidates, I'd still expect her to go after someone, but not likely someone in the top three. Buttigieg, O'Rourke, or a round two against Kamala Harris are more likely, but with Gabbard's flair for the dramatic, all bets are off. Gabbard has always managed to draw new attention in the debates. I don't see why this one will be any different. Julian Castro is also well known for his aggressive conflicts with other candidates, but now finds himself in a bit of a pickle. While I loved his strong clashes with Joe Biden in the third debate, as I expected, they resulted in mainly negative coverage from the mainstream media. He was reported as being a bully, described as implicitly attacking Biden's age, and in the post-debate coverage, ABC even claimed that he was totally wrong about his 2 minutes ago swipe against Joe Biden, even though if you actually examine the full context of what Castro had been saying, or Biden's actual healthcare plan, Castro was largely correct. If you want more on that, check out my third Democratic debate breakdown. Now Castro faces a choice: reverse course and avoid conflict and thus become a forgettable candidate, or plan another line of attack and face another round of attacks from the mainstream media. I anticipate that Castro is most likely to split the difference. He's likely to go on the offense again, but he will probably be extra cautious about controlling his tone, and may avoid targeting Biden, who seemed to have the sympathy of the mainstream press last time around. Indeed, when he was recently asked about Hunter Biden's position on the board of that Ukrainian gas company, Castro avoided the question. Those will be treacherous waters for Castro to navigate, and a slight error in tone is likely to cause lasting damage to his campaign. As a result, it's probably not wise to bet on a victory for Castro this time around. A win is far likelier for Andrew Yang, a candidate who has shown steady improvement in his debate performances time after time. In the third debate, Yang finally took my advice and started to talk about policies other than UBI, like his campaign finance reforms. He actually has a lot of other great proposals, which I expect him to begin mentioning in the fourth debate, now that he has firmly established himself as a Tier 2 contender, polling now between Kamala Harris and Beto O'Rourke. Last time, Yang drew much attention for his plan to give 10 families his freedom dividend for 1 year. I expected that the unusual ploy would garner attention but may soften support from his core. Well, it seems like I was half right. It did get him attention, but from the feedback I've gotten from his supporters, they didn't seem to mind the move one bit. Although I still think it's a bit of a cheeseballs move, I fully concede that this ended up being an even more positive move than I originally expected it to be. As the big three candidates continue to widen their gap with the rest of the field, few minor candidates still have a real shot at the big time in this primary race. But having steadily gained ground throughout, Yang is one of the few remaining candidates who could still manage to surge into contention if he plays his cards just right. His policies are thorough and often relatively original. His online support is extremely strong, and he has a powerful case to make about how to win over former Trump supporters. Yang is perfectly positioned to gain from making a big move in the fourth Democratic debate. Based on past performances, he's unlikely to get into a confrontation with another candidate, but he may have another headline-baiting trick up his sleeve. He's definitely a candidate to watch and a likely potential winner. Beto O'Rourke had a strong performance in the third Democratic debate, bolstered by his celebrated response to a national tragedy and renewed commitment to fight the NRA. Having done well last time, Beto will enter the fourth Democratic debate with more confidence than ever. But I can't say I expect amazing things. Beto's mini comeback did not last long, and his current RCP average is actually lower now than it was during the September debate. Beto's 15 minutes of fame seemed to be up before he even declared his run for the presidency, and his old problems may re-emerge now that he's lost the glow of general sympathy. Beto has been criticized in the past for being thin on policy, tainted by oil money, and a little hollow in his oration. He improved significantly on that last mark last time around, but I expect it's most likely that that was a temporary boost rather than a sustainable improvement. To solidify his standing in this race, Beto will have to draw attention away from the other candidates, most of whom, it seems to me, are inherently more interesting. It's unlikely Beto will secure a solid win in this debate. Now, I bear no ill will against Beto O'Rourke, but it's hard to see how this is his time to become president. I loved seeing his near-miss Senate race against Ted Cruz, and honestly, I would love to see him give up on the presidency for now and turn his attention to taking on John Cornyn for that other juicy Texas Senate seat. If he could almost beat someone with the name recognition of Ted Cruz, he might have what it takes to beat out the somewhat lesser-known John Cornyn. I'm just saying, something for the O'Rourke team to think about. Kamala Harris also appears to be a candidate whose hot streak is long behind her. At the beginning of the race, I quite honestly expected her to be the strongest contender amongst the establishment candidates. But shortly after her July surge in the polls, Harris has drooped in both the polls and her debate performances. I drastically overestimated what she would bring to the third Democratic debate, expecting her to stage some kind of comeback, after getting severely damaged by Tulsi Gabbard. Now it's beginning to get a bit late in the game for Kamala to make a comeback, especially with two flop performances in a row. Based on her performances in Senate hearings, I always expected Kamala to dominate debates. And while she shined in her first debate, we've seen her falter and fade since then. Harris may seem strong when she goes on the attack, but she's failed to be resilient in the face of criticism, and she's got plenty of vulnerabilities. Having slipped into 5th place in the polls, Harris's golden age seems to have come to an end. And with Gabbard on stage for debate 4, there's every reason to expect we'll see a deflated Harris once again. I'm expecting a loss for the prosecutor. Pete Buttigieg is, of course, the candidate who took 4th place from Kamala Harris, more through her own poll losses than his own gains. He had a particularly strong performance in Debate 3 as he laid out his policy suggestions in the arena of racial justice, a topic that has caused him damage in the past. It's not hard to predict what we'll see from Pete this time around, as he has pursued the same general strategy throughout his campaign. He'll bring some clever lines to the debate, stay upbeat and slightly evasive on controversial issues, avoid major conflicts, and put forth just enough policy to avoid criticisms about standing for nothing in particular. While there is a massive polling gap between Buttigieg and the top 3 candidates, he can survive another day, having outraised other big money candidates Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. He trails just behind Warren in terms of fundraising, and actually exceeds her when it comes to cash on hand, leaving only Bernie Sanders with a substantial lead over him in this area. While Buttigieg will need to surge in the polls at some point to be competitive in time for the Iowa caucus, his steady-as-she-goes strategy has been working well enough so far. He's unlikely to change up this tactic, and it's enough for him to secure a modest win for the 4th Democratic debate. Cory Booker has also been pursuing a relatively non-confrontational, positive-focused campaign, and has actually shown improvement since his first appearance on the presidential debate stage. Unfortunately for the senator, he doesn't have the kind of money that the top contenders have, nor is he seeing much positive movement in the polls. Since the last debate, Booker has dipped from an RCP average of 2.3% to 1.2 points, and he's fallen definitively behind Andrew Yang and Beto O'Rourke. While his comfort on stage has improved, Booker has not been able to make a real moment for himself in the third debate, and it seems a little like he's running out of tricks. Seeing these declines, Booker may just pull a rabbit out of his hat, but remember, bold moves are more likely to backfire than they are to work, and his mild-mannered approach to confrontation may fail to grab headlines, with characters like Gabbard and Castro willing to devastate their fellow Dems. It looks to me like Booker will have a hard time accomplishing what he needs to do to pull out a win in this debate. Amy Klobuchar showed marked improvement in the third Democratic debate, as she finally managed to change her passive-aggressive attacks into direct critiques of her progressive rivals. While I chalk this up as a win for the snow-resistant Minnesota senator, she's still managed to make many of the same mistakes throughout all of the debates. She uses extremely cheesy lines and hackneyed cliches, she is relatively soft-spoken and lackluster, and focuses almost all of her criticisms on Trump, but fails to distinguish herself from other Democrats. With the Ukraine scandal in full force, Klobuchar is more likely than ever to focus all her attention on the president's wrongdoings. The problem with this strategically is that there's nothing original or special about a Democratic candidate who says that Trump is a corrupt liar who should never have been elected president. That's literally what every Democratic candidate says. It's also what his primary challengers are saying. To inspire voters, a Democratic candidate also needs to provide an inspiring vision of what she can bring to the White House. Klobuchar seems to lack that vision, and the charisma necessary to hook voters with it. Time after time, Klobuchar is among the most forgettable candidates on stage, and she's poised to be the same this time around. After the third Democratic debate, I argued that despite saying all the right things, Sanders would lose a bit of ground in the polls because of the simple fact that his voice sounded a bit hoarse. I got a lot of flack for thinking that the American people would be so superficial, but as it turned out, he did experience a small drop in the polls after that debate, dropping 1.1 points in his RCP average, while Warren's numbers surged. Sanders' numbers began to spring back, but he seems to have taken another small dip after being hospitalized. I know this is annoying for policy-focused voters, but Bernie's age is a concern for a lot of Democrats, and will probably remain so, at least until he picks a vibrant younger progressive candidate as his running mate to assure his more tepid supporters that his ticket is a safe, resilient bet. While Bernie never bends on policy positions or general themes, having just bounced back from surgery, he's gotta know that he can't come to this debate with another sore throat. If he comes back stronger and angrier than ever, I expect he'll see gains in his support, as voters are surprised by his resilience. That would be a win for Bernie, and it's what I expect to see. But if he seems even slightly diminished, the mainstream media won't hesitate to criticize him as weak and sickly for taking more than a week to recover from a heart attack and surgery. That would convince a broad swath of Democrats to abandon him. So while I do expect a win, there is a serious risk of taking damage. So far, Elizabeth Warren has performed well in every debate, and made gains after each and every one of them. She's never really changed her strategy, it's been working for her, and there's no reason to expect that she'll change things up, or that it will evoke a different result this time around. Currently surging into spitting distance of the frontrunner Joe Biden, Warren may just jump into first place shortly after the fourth Democratic debate. Barring some unforeseen incident, the fourth debate will be an important victory for Elizabeth Warren. With Trump's Ukraine call becoming one of the biggest stories of his presidency, there is little doubt that Joe Biden will have much to say about impeachment and his own connection to Trump's inappropriate behavior. There is a chance that being targeted by Trump will garner sympathy, thus making his debate performance a slam dunk. But there is also a possibility that the scandal exposes new vulnerabilities for Biden as a candidate. It will be very interesting to watch what kind of questions Biden gets in regards to this issue. You'll know he's being served a layup if he is asked about the unsubstantiated conspiracy theory that he cut investigations into the Ukrainian energy company short. If, however, Biden is asked why his son was being paid $50,000 per month to sit on a board of a company that works in a sector with which he has had no experience, Biden's getting a serious question about a real concern for most Americans. Biden's son getting this position shows that he is a participant in the systemic Washington corruption that Americans are beyond sick of seeing. The result of these questions is perhaps less interesting. I would imagine that if he is asked the tough questions, Biden would likely fumble, either by providing a sprawling non-answer or by feigning outrage. If he is not asked the tough questions, he may lose by default if Americans note the media bias in his favor. Just another example of Beltway table tilting. Don't get me wrong, Hunter Biden's apparent pay for influence was not illegal or even irregular for the families of Washington elites. Nor is that example of systemic corruption comparable to Trump withholding military aid while asking the Ukrainian president for a sketchy personal political favor. But it is very much comparable to the hundreds of thousands of dollars that Wall Street firms paid Hillary Clinton for speeches. While those already familiar with Biden's fundraising sources, what he's said to major donors, and how he's voted throughout his career, will already likely see him as an asset of wealthy elites, his son's unearned paydays expose Biden to be part of the problem for a broader swath of the American public. The scandal can also deal a second layer of damage for Biden. His participation in legal systemic corruption may also lose him voters who no longer see him as electable. On top of the busing and the unwanted touching issues, Biden now faces another serious challenge. At some point, voters may feel enough is enough and turn to someone with fewer skeletons in their closet. Again, Biden may be able to elicit sympathy to spin this story as an unfair attack on his family, which I would see as a win. But it seems more likely to me that he'll earn the ire of the public for being part of typical Washington corruption. In this way, Biden enters the fourth Democratic debate more vulnerable than ever. A loss is highly likely. That's what I expect, but honestly, it really could break in either direction. Maybe Biden will seem like more of an elite insider than ever. Maybe he'll seem like a victim. Either way, this issue and how it's perceived in both this debate and beyond will help to determine the answer to this question about the Biden campaign.